Joining us right now is Brent Bozell, a man who gave you one of your first jobs here in Washington, D.C., did he not?
He sure did. I was a blogger over at Newsbusters.
You know, that's actually, Brent Bozell, Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us. I have to say, just for a moment, before we get into all of the media malpractice that we see every day right now in Washington, you really have started so many careers in this town and really have changed the face of the way news is reported thanks to all of the young people you've given opportunities to. Do you ever reflect on that and think, wow, this isn't bad what I've done?
No, I do, and hello, Carrie, and
hey, Brent.
Happy New Year to you both. No, I do, because it's one of my great joys that the intern program that we have at the MRC has generated some very, very great talent that's all over this town and all over this country.
Who aren't necessarily conservative, they just don't go about the business of reporting exactly the way we see from the so obviously biased liberal media. That's all.
Yeah, as Carrie will attest, if you go to work for CNS News, if you go to work for Newsbusters, you're allowed to have a conservative bias because it's opinion. But if you go to work for our news site, CNS News, under Terry Jeffrey, if you try to promote your opinion on CNS News, you won't last there very long.
Exactly.
Because he's adamant about the rules of journalism, which is another thing I pride myself with. I will put our news, our journalism, ahead of the New York Times any day of the week.
Well, and given that, let's go to the New York Times, Brent Bozell, because I have been so livid. Carrie's been livid because we covered the Benghazi story from day one, and to see what came out on the old gray lady there, all the news that's fit to print. Many people have said Kirkpatrick did a good job in reporting certain facts, but then he reached conclusions that are so at odds with anything that anyone who is familiar with this story understands to be the truth. What is happening with this article, and is this actually going to really hurt the New York Times in the long run, considering the bogus nature of this story, trying to rewrite the history of Benghazi?
It's going to continue to hurt the New York Times. The New York Times had already earned the reputation of being utterly partisan, especially on matters of foreign policy. This goes way back. This goes back to Bush 41 with the intrepid journalism that sees the world completely different from reality. In this story, however, I guess maybe they've just outdone themselves, because to believe this fellow is to disbelieve the following. Members of the House Intelligence Committee, both Democrats and Republicans, it is to disbelieve dozens of people interviewed on the ground by name who are intelligence officials. It is to disbelieve the countless public policy organizations, the nonpartisan, that have done these reviews linking al-Qaeda to the attacks. And it's to disbelieve journalists themselves who have said that. And, oh, by the way, 6 weeks after the attack, the New York Times said it was al-Qaeda.
You know, Brent, something that I brought up earlier this morning was that David Kirkpatrick, the writer of this New York Times piece, he has been saying that these militia leaders, otherwise known as we like to call them, the normal people, al-Qaeda.
Yeah, terrorists.
Exactly. He has been saying that they have not been connected to al-Qaeda since October of 2012. He has been putting this meme into his stories for quite a long time now, so to call this a huge bombshell is pretty interesting. What do you have to say about the New York Times calling this some huge expose when this was something that they've been saying all along?
Yeah, and you have to ask yourself, what's the politics of this story? Because behind the New York Times, there's always politics. You know, don't forget, when CBS did that now fully discredited Rathergate story that was intended to undermine the integrity of George Bush in the final days of the 1988 campaign, it turned out it was CBS working in conjunction with the New York Times.
Yeah.
And the reason the CBS ran it was because they learned that the New York Times was going to betray them and run the story before them. And so they rushed out to get it out, which is, by the way, why they ran it too soon to do the damage they wanted to inflict, because it gave time for the story to be debunked. But the New York Times was in on this as well.
Well, and listen, this is everyone is suggesting that this obviously is the New York Times trying to run interference early for Hillary Clinton. Isn't this, Hillary Clinton is not going to talk to the media for at least a year, if not longer. Once she's in the campaign and people start asking her about Benghazi, the entire Clinton camp, they're going to close ranks, and they're just going to say, oh, that's old news. The New York Times wrote the definitive article about it. You're just part of the right-wing conspiracy.
Yeah, this is a Clintonian MO, and it worked very well for Bill.
Given that, do you think John Podesta might be involved in this, Brent Bozell? I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Sure, of course I do. Of course I do. And everything. There's more than meets the eye with any of this kind of stuff. And when you see, look, the New York Times is now in bed with George Soros, because George Soros is producing news stories that are being run by the New York Times. So their attachments to far left organizations are there. They do want Hillary Clinton elected next president of the United States. She will try to use it, but I don't think it's going to work because the New York Times has such little credibility. Do you see anyone rushing to their defense right now?
No, no one. It's really remarkable how quiet it is out there. Hey, Brent Bozell, while I've got you, obviously we're looking back at the year 2013. Let's talk about the Affordable Care Act real fast and how the media was really exposed for negligence in not reporting widely the fact that President Obama knew going in that if you liked your insurance, you weren't going to keep your insurance thanks to his plan. Again, is that a black eye that they can't recover from?
Well, yeah, and it continues to be a black eye because they're still not covering it. Yes, they finally did start covering it, but do you imagine if George Bush had done this, if Ronald Reagan had done this, taken to the airwaves repeatedly to lie? Didn't Richard Nixon get in trouble for this kind of stuff? They just, well, he really shouldn't have. Let's move on to the next thing. No, the media are going to continue to be pummeled, if I have anything to say about it, because they refuse to hold this guy accountable. I cannot, and the American people cannot believe Barack Obama on anything anymore. When he says it's running, when he says X amount of people are enrolled, every time he says something, you look at it, well, it's not quite what he said it was. And it's because this administration lies with impunity because the media allow them to.
Hey, Brent, I'm curious. I know that sometimes the Media Research Center does studies on how many times certain things are said by the mainstream media. And in this case, I know that in the beginning when the liberals thought that Obamacare was going to be a big hit with the country, it was all about owning Obamacare. Then all of a sudden, when it turned out to be a huge disaster, or we always knew it was, but publicly everyone found out about it very recently, they're beginning to call it the Affordable Care Act. Have you guys been looking at the numbers on how often the media is now just calling it the Affordable Care Act?
It. Suddenly it's not Obamacare.
I have it. You know, there's a reverse to this. We really should do that. I don't know if you recall. In 1982, Ronald Reagan was at the point where the economic numbers came down crashing, and unemployment and inflation came crashing, and employment numbers went up, and interest rates came crashing. Ronald Reagan quipped famously, I guess they're not going to talk about Reaganomics anymore.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what we're seeing. All right. Happy New Year to you, Brent Bozell. So great to end the year with you. And really quickly, do you have any thoughts on who the next head coach of the Redskins should be?
Please don't get me going.
All right. We'll
Happy New Year, Brent.
We'll save that for another time. Thanks,
I want you to do it.
I'm ready.
Would you do it? Somebody do it.